This podcast is slated to be released on January 17th, which is Martin Luther King Day. Today, for our inaugural episode of Season 3, we will explore what we were told about King's death versus some more information that surfaced years after his assassination. My name is Sophia Talley, and this is True Crime in It. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was in Memphis, Tennessee, supporting a strike against black sanitation workers who were facing deplorable treatment typical of the time, such as unequal pay in comparison to their white coworkers. On the day before, despite a bomb threat made against his flight into Memphis, King had delivered his famous "I've been to the mountaintop" speech to a captivated crowd at Mason Temple. Towards the end of his speech, King eerily states, "Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will, and He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord." End quote. On April 4th, King and his trusted entourage was staying at Lorraine Motel in his usual room 306. Among those staying with him was his best friend Ralph Abernathy and colleague Jesse Jackson. They were getting ready to attend a dinner with a local pastor. King called down from the balcony to where Jesse Jackson and famed jazz musician Ben Branch were standing in the parking lot. He joked with Jackson about the latter's missing tie before telling Branch, and I quote, "Ben, make sure you play Take My Hand, Precious Lord in the meeting tonight. Play it real pretty." And that was when a gunshot cracked through the air, striking King so hard in his cheek that his necktie fell to the floor. Jackson thought that he was dead immediately, but King actually held on to life until 7:05 p.m. that day after receiving emergency chest surgery at St. Joseph's Hospital. Afterwards, it was revealed that King's heart was weak, possibly from the stress of his humanitarian work. King's death left the country shattered, with riots burning in every major city. The assassination was quickly found to be the work of lone shooter James Earl Ray, who, at the time of his arrest, was found at London Heathrow Airport. Ray pled guilty to the assassination of King and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. And that's where the story of King's assassination ends. It was the work of one racist white man, or so they say. What I have just recounted to you is the official story and possibly the one that you learned about in school. It's the one that I was taught. But what if I were to tell you that people who were close to King at the time had a much different, much more sinister story? What if these people found themselves stuck in a trap where the strings were being pulled by those who were under oath to protect them? There are a lot of theories about who killed King and why, but today we are going to discuss one of the more troublesome ones, that the FBI could have been behind the assassination. To get to the beginning of the theory, we need to go back to 1964, when it officially became known that the FBI had their sights on King. In 1964, the FBI King's suicide letter was sent first to Coretta Scott King, then Martin Luther King. The FBI King suicide letter was an anonymous poison pen letter proven to have been sent by the FBI that seemed to urge MLK to commit suicide or else his private sexual life would be revealed. Along with the letter were tapes that prove the claims made in said letter. And the letter is bizarre. And I will post a version that has been made public with only one part being redacted. And it is a weird letter, okay? And nowadays, in a world where politicians can literally commit sexual crimes and be elected into office, the accusations made were very tame. It was only about infidelity. But back then, these accusations could have not just been career-ending, but it could have prevented King from earning the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964, ending the civil rights movement as we know it right then and there. At the time, King suspected that the letters were sent by the FBI, as they were the only organization that could have the resources to bug MLK's personal bedroom. But why would the FBI send a letter to Martin Luther King Jr.? Well, let's look at who was directing the FBI at the time. J. Edgar Hoover. Hoover was a known opposer to the civil rights movement, as he felt that it was dividing the nation, which could then destabilize the American government. Hoover also feared that the Communist Party may have infiltrated the civil rights movement. Hoover saw MLK as an enemy to the state and had his sights set on him, just waiting for MLK to cross a line that he had drawn. And that line was drawn about a year before King's death. In 1967, King opposed the Vietnam War as he felt that resources that could have been used to help aid impoverished communities were being wasted on the war effort. King's opposition of the war was big, as not only did it gain him more white followers, but it directly opposed President Lyndon B. Johnson's belief that the war was necessary. Also, at the time, King was considering running for presidency, and with such a strong following that was now moving into the mainstream due to his opposition of the war, his chances of winning were heightened. Because of the FBI's opposal to King's rise to power, and because it seemed as if that power was only growing, many around King, including his entourage and even his family, believed that Ray was a scapegoat. See, King wasn't the only controversial political figure that the FBI had their sights on. The late John F. Kennedy was also on Edgar Hoover's list of secret enemies of the state, and he too was assassinated by a lone shooter. The coincidence did not go unnoticed, and people close to King took a closer look at Ray. Ray was a career criminal who was originally jailed for robbing a grocer's. In 1967, he escaped prison by hiding, get this, in a bread truck that was delivering bread from the prison's bakery. After traveling around, Ray ended up in LA in November of 1967, where he began to follow the far-right movement that was popping up in opposition to the mostly liberal city. Ray backed George Wallace, the governor of Alabama, who believed in segregation. Ray was straight fanatical, though, to the point where, to get this, he wanted to move to Rhodesia, which is now in modern-day Zimbabwe, and hopefully I'm saying that right, because at the time it was controlled by white colonists. Ray, though, did not make it to Rhodesia, as by March of 68, he was on his way to a nearly month-long road trip with the goal of assassinating Martin Luther King. On the surface, Ray's profile sounds about right for a lone shooter. He was an unhinged drifter on the run from the law. Tie in his far-right beliefs, and he was a recipe for disaster. His fingerprints were found on a rifle and a set of binoculars that were discarded in a package near the crime scene. Ray even admitted to the murder by pleading guilty, but surprisingly, only 3 days afterwards, he tried to recant his plea, claiming that his lawyer pressured him into it as a way to save him from the electric chair. It was at this point when Ray's story began to evolve. He began to tell a story about meeting a man in Montreal sometime in 1967 who roped him into a plot to assassinate King. Ray even claimed that he did not directly shoot King, but was involved in the plot. He shared his story to the press. But there were inconsistencies in his claims. For example, Ray said that he purposefully left the rifle and binoculars in plain sight because he wanted to gain notoriety and felt that he would be pardoned for the assassination of King. Despite these inconsistencies, Ray maintained his innocence until he died in jail on April 23, 1998. Throughout his imprisonment, he continued to attempt to recant his confession. In 1993, a man named Lloyd Jowers got on national television and confessed to teaming up with the local Memphis Mafia and the federal government to assassinate King and frame Ray. He claimed that Frank Liberto, a Memphis grocer rumored to have mafia connections, paid Lloyd $100,000 to assassinate MLK. Liberto was also heard creating a plot to kill an unnamed person while they stood on a balcony. Sounds familiar? By the time Lloyd Jowers came forward with his story, Liberto was already deceased. Lloyd, though, could not keep his story straight when it came to who pulled the trigger. He named a few gunmen, including Raul, the man that Ray met in Montreal, and a police officer. Please note that no one has been able to identify Raul. Another witness, Memphis businessman John McFerrin, overheard Liberto yell over a phone call just an hour before the assassination, and I quote, "Shoot the blank" when he comes on the balcony. In the late 90s, the King family, namely his children and Coretta, felt that Ray was a scapegoat and felt that the FBI were the real perpetrators. Dexter, MLK's son, visited Ray in 1997 and asked him if he killed his father. Once again, Ray denied killing MLK, and get this, the Kings believed him. They took their belief to the courtroom and in 1999 filed a civil suit against Jowers in a wrongful death suit. But they ran into a problem. The same problem that I ran into repeatedly while writing this episode. They had no names. The thing is, the lawsuit was not just against Jowers, but also against his unnamed conspirators. Also, they had pages and pages of evidence, like 4,000 pages worth of evidence, but again, not enough to implicate in the court of law any particular government agency. In preparations for this episode, I read A Plot to Kill by William F. Pepper, who was not only Ray's lawyer after he recanted on his guilty plea, but also was the King's family lawyer in the civil suit. Pepper brought in 70 witnesses and strongly believed that a Memphis police officer named Earl Clark was the gunman. The jury, which was half black and half white, only had to deliberate for 1 hour before reaching their decision. They found Jowers and his unknown conspirators, including an unnamed government entity, civilly guilty of murdering MLK. The King family was awarded $100 as they were not wanting money, just to prove that there were greater forces at play in the death of their patriarch. I'm going to stop here and recommend that you either read or listen to Pepper's book, A Plot to Kill King. I was unable to finish it because Pepper had his sights set on holding a particular government agency responsible for King's death, despite the fact that he appeared on TV a lot. He even performed, side note, he performed a mock trial on HBO. You can tell, though, that he is sincere in his beliefs and his evidence is astounding. Also, I should note, he knew King in the 60s. He met with him and talked to him about the war crimes happening in Vietnam. And though I'm inclined to believe Pepper's evidence over that which was provided by the Department of Justice, and we'll get to that in a minute, for the sake of the podcast, I feel it's my duty to present the facts and have my audience decide. This is partly because of the Department of Justice actually reopened the case themselves. And in the year 2000, they found no evidence of a government conspiracy or the mafia's involvement and suggested that Jowers was acting with his own financial gain in mind. The Department of Justice findings are made public in the U.S. National Archives and Records Administration, and I will link the official page in the show notes. And that was the mostly untold story of how and why Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. Now, I just want to hear your thoughts. Comment in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, comment there and let me know. Did you know about any of these discrepancies in MLK's death, or are you just finding it out for the first time? I heard about it a little bit, but I didn't get to delve so much into it until I started researching for this episode. My name is Sophia Talley, and this has been True Crime in Knit. For more information, please visit www.thedrunknitter.com/truecrime. And now it's time for the knittermission. So, welcome to season 3. I am so excited to share with you my first episode of season 3. I went back and forth whether or not I wanted to cover the Martin Luther King assassination. I see it as a crime, 100%. It's a true crime, but I felt like we've heard the story over and over again, and I feel like it's a story that should not just be reserved for Martin Luther King Day, and it should be, spoken about on every day, regardless whether or not it's a holiday or not. And so that's why I was like, well, I could release it on another day. I was thinking maybe on the date of his assassination, because I do like to save this day for a celebration of his life versus mourning his death. But I really wanted to share what people around King were thinking at the time. I find that very, very important information that I do not find being retold that often. So thank you for joining me on that journey. And as for what I've been working on, I've been working a lot lately and I absolutely love it. I have so many designs coming out soon, but something that's coming out right now that you can pre-order is my book, Knit 2 Socks in 1. So I wrote a book, I can't believe it, and it's about how you could knit one long sock and turn it into 2 socks. So I came up with this method, which is a collection of tried and true knitting methods, and I combined them to create a new way to knit socks 2 at a time. And I worked with some amazing people on this book, such as Story Publishing and Kate Atherley, who tech edited the book. Thank you. And so it's something that I've been working on for over a year now, if not 2 years, because the pandemic really slowed a lot of things down. And I am just super excited to get this book out into the world. It should be on bookshelves on March 1st, but you can buy it on pre-order from Amazon, and I'll put the link below. And what's so special about this project for me is that it's one of my favorite best kept secrets, okay? Because I love knitting socks 2 at a time. But when you knit socks 2 at a time, I'm going to see if I can pull up a picture. So you knit 2 socks next to each other. And so you have this really long round of working 2 socks at once, and it tends to take forever. I tend to get discouraged when I knit 2 socks at the same time because each round takes forever. I'm working with 2 balls of yarn, they get tangled and all of that, and it's just a lot. And it's also hard to travel with because your yarn gets tangled. You got 2 whole socks on the needle. But what I like about 2 socks in 1 is that you knit one long tube, so you're knitting pretty much a long sock, and then using the given lifelines that you add to your knitting, you could then cut it in half and have 2 pairs of socks. And so you're knitting 2 socks in 1 sock, essentially, in the simplest form of the word. And the thing is that like sock knitting to me is like relaxing. It's supposed to be something that you sit, relax. I love it on road trips. And so that's what I had in mind for this method. I wanted to create a new way of knitting socks that wasn't finicky, that was easy to understand, that anyone can do, and that didn't have so many roadblocks in the form of learning different techniques. All the techniques are pretty much beginner-friendly techniques. And of course, I have different variations that you can then add to make it either more difficult, if you like it to be, to the sock. So there's like tons of variations, tons of different socks designs in one book, and I absolutely positively love it. So please check it out. Also, by the time this podcast is up, if you catch it on Monday, you will still have time to join me at Vogue Knitting Live this month as I teach some fun knitting classes virtually. So sign up should still be up even through the weekend. So that's just what I've been up to now. And I really, really, really hope to see y'all there. Anyway, thank you for joining me, and I'll catch you next time. Bye.